Hello everybody, welcome to episode 255 of Show Free, which today we'll be going over the Genkai's tournament arc of Yu Yu Hakusho. So, this arc starts off with Yusuke kind of getting a little bit of a missive from Botan and Koenma that he has to find this individual known as Rando, who has been going about and defeating spiritual practitioners and appears to be searching after demonly arts and such. And it now looks as if he's going to go and try to learn the arts of this individual by the name of Genkai. And Genkai is a very powerful spiritual power user, and it is up to Yusuke now to go find him and thwart him. So we see as he ends up heading to Genkai's place, where there's a bunch of people there. Everyone is piled in, and they're all hoping to learn Genkai's ability, because Genkai has set up a tournament to find a successor to her abilities. So this all kind of plays out. We end up seeing that Kuwabara is here because he was here to like get medicine or something like that, or some healing, and he just kind of ends up getting roped in alongside all of this. And we see as ultimately the first thing that Genkai exposes them to kind of narrow them down is a lottery. So everyone ends up picking from a lottery, and she specifically, I guess, attuned this lottery so that whoever had a strong spiritual power would be, I guess, selected and see a red kind of piece of paper for whenever they drew their lottery ticket. So after this, we see as everyone's kind of narrowed down, and then she ends up taking them to like this game corner where all of them are, I guess, made to play these games so they can measure the different attributes of their spiritual power. We see like physical spiritual power, like aptitude with spiritual, I guess, fluidity, conductivity, I don't know. But we see this plays out, and everyone kind of gets narrowed down. And then after that, we see as they are all put into essentially this race to get to this tree that goes through a very thick and malicious, malignant forest that will attack them as they run along. And it is very frightening, and she knows that this will help narrow down some of the people. And because of just how truly frightening this forest is, they'll sense the spiritual power, and they're like, I don't want to go in there. So we see as everyone kind of starts to progress through it, and the first person to actually make it to the tree is Kuwabara, and we also see some other people start kind of filling in, but Yusuke is absent for the time being, because he has got stopped by this Vlad Dracula looking like Batman. But yeah, so we see this, and then Yusuke is ultimately able to defeat him. He ends up pulling up to the tree, technically late, but Genkai's like, you beat him? So she ultimately allows him to come along for the final actual tournament of the Genkai tournament, which is a tournament. It is actually a martial arts tournament. Well, not necessarily martial arts, but a spiritual power martial arts tournament. And we see in the first round as everyone's kind of matched up, and they must face their opponents in darkness so that they can only sense their opponent through spiritual power and all that good pizzazz. And we see throughout all this that Yusuke is trying to figure out, who is Rando? Now, by this point in the story, I already knew who Rando was. Not because I've been spoiled or anything, but because it was kind of obvious who he was. Like, we had all these big, tough macho men, and then we have Shorin in the corner, who's just like this little giddy-looking monk dude, and it was kind of obvious that it was him. But yeah, so we kind of see this plays out, and the two main people to focus on are Kuwabara and Yusuke. Kuwabara actually does pretty good in his fight and is ultimately able to win. And specifically in this fight, he faced a opponent known as Musashi, and he was able to beat Musashi because Musashi broke his sword, and Kuwabara ended up picking up a piece of it and then using his spiritual power that he did not know he had to create like this lightsaber looking to fight him off. So Kuwabara finishes his match, and then we see Yusuke ends up going to this dude who's like using a helmet to see in the darkness. And ultimately, Yusuke, what he does to track him is he throws a cigarette which was flicked at him onto the dude, and then he sees him and then hits him with a spirit gun. So then after that, we progress along, and we get to the semifinals, where we see as everyone kind of faces down, Kuwabara ends up making it, not Kuwabara doesn't end up making it, Kuwabara ends up facing off against Shorin and loses. And we also see as Yusuke faces up against his opponent, whose name I believe was Kazemura, and he beats him. Now, also prior to this, we see as Botan ended up pulling up, and we had a bit of a goofy interaction where we see as Kuwabara presumes that Botan is Yusuke's girlfriend. However, she is not, and she ends up revealing this, and so does Yusuke. And then Kuwabara is like, please let me be your boyfriend. And so that's kind of a little goofy stint there. So then after getting to the finals, where we see as Kuwabara is defeated, so now it's just Shorin versus Yusuke. And this final fight is pretty cool. We see as in the previous fight with Kuwabara, Shorin had shrunk Kuwabara down with his demonic spell chant things. And so now Yusuke kind of knows what to face up against. So he ends up fighting with Shorin and goes pretty well. He actually ends up forcing Shorin to go into his like full form, which actually kind of looks like crap. I can't remember his name. I think his name is Akaza from Demon Slayer or Akazat, something like that. And so we see this final form is pulled out, and Yusuke has quite a bit of trouble. However, he ultimately ends up getting some of Kuwabara's spiritual power imbued in him after Kuwabara ends up releasing it to him, and then Yusuke is able to use his spirit gun once more on Shorin, or Rando technically, because this dude is in fact Rando. And we then see as it is Rando, yeah, Rando, not Rhonda, yeah, Rando. But yeah, so see this, ultimately he is defeated. However, Rando is in fact not defeated. He ends up getting up after tanking one of Yusuke's spirit guns, and then he acts like he's about to shrink Yusuke down. However, because of his, I guess, lack of mastery over his powers, he in fact ends up shrinking himself, and the day is saved. And we see Genkai kind of explains this to him after he is shrunk and beaten by Yusuke after Yusuke falls on him. But then, after this, we see as Genkai ultimately ends up following on her word. She allows Yusuke to come under her tutelage, and he will now be trained. And I believe he is, after this, is trained for a month or 2 months. I think it's 2 months, actually. And he slowly builds up his spiritual power so that he can become an even better spirit realm detective. But yeah, that's kind of where the Genkai's tournament arc of Yu Yu Hakusho ended. And I really enjoyed this arc. It was a good little tournament arc. Like, I wish some of the other fights that weren't necessarily with Kuwabara and Yusuke would have been kind of focused on a little bit more. Now, like the tree, like the getting to the tree, honestly, a lot kind of reminded me a lot of the Hunter exams in Hunter x Hunter. I mean, there's probably a reason why there's so much similarity. Well, not necessarily so much similarity, but like quite a bit of similarity between them, because I mean, they're both Togashi. So yeah. And I did really enjoy this arc. Now, I know there is a better tournament arc to come along. I believe it's called like the Dark Tournament. And I'm super excited to get to it, because I've heard a lot of really good things about it. And I cannot wait to enjoy the, I guess, bountiful feast that is waiting for me there. But yeah, this little tournament arc, though, was good, kind of slating the palette with some good old shonen tournaments. And I did like to see the very crafty and creative fight between Rando and, Rando and Yusuke there at the end, and also seeing Kuwabara finally, I guess, pull out his latent spiritual potential, because we've seen that he has a very high, heightened sensitivity for spiritual entities. However, this is the first time we've actually seen him pull out a spiritual technique for the offensive. So yeah, like I said, that's all it really was for that arc, and that's all we really have for episode 255 of Show Reviews. So thank you very much for watching.